Hello, everyone, and welcome to Thriving Children Summit. Today we have Dr. Dr. Porges, and he is the author of the polyvagal theory. He is a distinguished university scientist at the Kinsey Institute, Indiana University, and professor of psychology at the University of North Carolina. He has also developed the Safe and Sound Protocol, which can be found on Integrated Listening website. So you can go ahead and find it there, but we want to say hello and thank you so much for being here, sir.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. We're there.
All right. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and how we kind of got to the polyvagal theory?
Well, I mean,
it's going to be a long story.
Well, yeah, they're long stories, and it's a short interview. Well, the polyvagal theory is a theory about how our body limits or provides us with a platform for many of the feelings and behaviors that we experience and express. So that it's, we live in a world where people think that everything's through our intentions. We want to do things, we should be listening, we should be engaging. But the cues from our body often tell us something else. They tell us that we need to get out of there, we need to fight, we need to run. Polyvagal theory explains what those physiological signals are and what their evolutionary adaptation was and where they came from. And often our body is giving us cues of defense, and we're, in a sense, within our society and educational system, told don't pay attention to those cues. And that then results in another confounding of our health conditions. So polyvagal theory basically identified three basic physiological states: a state that was calming and socially engaged, which means we could spontaneously listen to another, be present with another, and co-regulate, meaning support. In today's world, we talk about being present with someone. So that's part of this newer mammalian autonomic nervous system. But we inherited other circuits that support fight flight. And we've often talked about those circuits as stress systems. But they can be recruited in play. We can utilize mobilization, but we're utilizing our newer social engagement system, always making vocal or facial reference to another person, so we co-regulate. And finally, we have a very ancient circuit that when we were under severe challenges, we would just shut down, meaning the more ancient vertebrates, their sole defense system was to appear not to be alive. To immobilize. Now, as we put those three together, we start seeing the social, the gregarious part, the part of our lives where we can understand, we can do auditory processing, our speech conveys prosody, people understand what we're saying. And then when people get more defensive, their autonomic state changes, they get more mobilized, the voices lose intonation, their ability to process auditory signals gets dampened for human voice, but actually gets better for danger signals, predator signals. And then if we have no avenue to escape, to fight or flee, our bodies may shut down. And when you have clients in which they have severe trauma histories, they will tell you that. They just disappeared. And now polyvagal theory provides us as a understanding of physiological state. And in doing that, it provides portals for treatment.
Okay, so when we talk about all of those things in terms of, are we talking when the Safe and Sound Protocol, when it is used, is it really affecting that vagus nerve?
It's affecting an integrated system that is tied to this newer mammalian vagal system, which is a calming system. Okay. So what the Safe and Sound Protocol is really, if you want to distill the essence of trust and safety, what modality would you use? You'd use a vocalization very similar to a maternal lullaby. So a Safe and Sound Protocol is actually amplifying intonation within frequency bands that our nervous system has to say, I'm safe, I'm back in mother's arms. And so it functions like an acoustic vagal nerve stimulator. In fact, the Safe and Sound Protocol, the technology, received a patent, and one of the claims that was accepted was that of an acoustic vagal nerve stimulator. So another way of thinking of Safe and Sound is thinking of it as a state regulator. It's a calming system.
Okay. So do we find that children, even adults, because I think both can use it, but go ahead.
Okay, so the real question is with children, it's almost universally very, very positive and works well
Okay.
because children are always, they're not in a clinical environment or in the world by themselves. They're not feral. They're supported in different ways. So if their bodies become accessible, they also become vulnerable. And this is the dimension I want you to think about. Accessibility as a human being carries with it a responsibility or a burden. You're vulnerable. So if you're accessible, you're vulnerable. Safe and sound makes the child accessible. They're now engaging, they're listening, but their defenses are turned off. Their defenses, which are reflected in autonomic function, but also in behavioral function. So the child now becomes spontaneously engaging, makes more eye contact, uses facial expressivity, intonation increases. But what happens if the mother or the peers don't have time for the child? So the child's engaging and now the parent turns away because they're busy or they had a real tough day. Well, the system then gets functionally frustrated and angry, and the kids may become oppositional. So if you have a child that is spontaneously engaging, it's both wonderful, but it's also demanding and responsible. Creates responsibilities for parents and other adults in the setting. Now, let's now move this as an application to people, to adults. And for many adults, this is just a miraculous game changer. It changes their physiological state. They calm down, their anxieties are reduced. But for some people who have had a severe trauma history, and this is where it gets very both interesting, complicated, and in many ways heartfelt, because when you are a survivor of severe trauma, cues of safety are not cues of safety. Cues of safety are cues of accessibility and vulnerability. So now your body gets into this state of I'm vulnerable. Now, what does it do next? It says, been there before, getting the hell out of there.
Mhm.
And you can actually see this happening with some people. So some of the responses have been with people with trauma histories is initially, oh, this is just, oh, I'm here. This is unique. I'm in my body. Wow.
Mhm.
And then the next day, their body is basically scolding them, saying, you're vulnerable. Don't stay there. It's not like we're cognitively
Right.
deciding or going through that, but
Mhm.
the body is, and its nervous system is making different decisions for us.
Mhm.
So SSP, or Safe and Sound Protocol, with a person with severe trauma can be very useful if it's used with an integrated trauma treatment model, someone who works with people, enabling them to resolve. Initially, I thought it would be relatively easy. If you've got discomfort, the body would, in a sense, recover itself and it would resolve, and you just stop for a few minutes and go back. For many, that works fine, but for some, the cue of being safe or relaxing or giving up defenses is so profound that their bodies just go into a state, I'm not going there. And so they need to work with a very skilled trauma-informed therapist. When they do that, we're starting to see miraculous effects. So meaning many of the trauma therapists are saying when they use SSP within their trauma treatment model, it accelerates the treatment, the time that's needed to resolve these feelings and experiences it by months. And for some, what they're saying is 6 months or more, it's accelerating it.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's huge.
Yeah. But remember, it's huge with a risk, meaning that you need a therapist who's very trauma informed.
Mhm. So how long do you find that these last, now I'm going back.
Yeah.
So because of the SSB is about 1 week that it takes to
Yeah.
run through it.
Yeah. Well, in reality, even though it's set up for a week, those who use it see that there are changes that can occur in a couple of days
Mhm.
that are really tremendous. And you say, where did these come from? How could this can't be neuroplasticity. It's too fast. What it is, it's turning off defense. And when you turn off defense, these things percolate up. Now, what happens is when they percolate up, meaning that accessibility and the vulnerability for the child, let's talk about the child.
Yeah.
If the social environment picks up on that, so when the kid is engaging, the parent's responsive, the
Mhm.
things just get better and better. It doesn't disappear. But we live in a world where a lot of people are in states of defense a significant portion of their waking life, especially parents. They might have one or more jobs, they have kids, they have all these things going on. There's financial insecurity,
Mhm.
there's the social world of their children they're dealing with. It's a complicated world. And so their bodies can't just lay back. And so they end up not even being available for the kids or for their spouse who may be socially engaged. What we're finding out is really, actually, this is from a mother who was a therapist.
Mhm.
Her kid went through SSP and was doing great. And 6 months later, went back through it again. She goes in after the fifth day to see the kid, and the kid goes into tantrum.
Okay.
Now, she was a very, very sophisticated person, and so she tied it all together. She had just talked to a physician who told her something that she didn't really like to hear. And so her face went flat. She
Uh,
went in to see her kid engages her, she's this, the kid gets
yeah.
frustrated and goes into an oppositional type behavior. And this is part of the issue, is that when a nervous system attempts to engage and someone turns away, how do we feel? How do we feel if you said, "Hi, Steve, and I did this to you"?
Right.
Your body would immediately go somewhere, but your mind and your narrative is so clever, it would come up with a rational reason why it turned away.
Mhm.
And the issues, you say, well, I'm not important enough, he doesn't like me. You come up with this elaborative narrative that doesn't respect the fact that my behaviors are really inappropriate behaviors for social interaction. And
Do you find that one of my question is how would you get parents to get the most out of their kids? Should they be doing this with their kids?
well, doing with it is really a good start.
Mhm.
And when I started doing this work, it's over 20 years ago, and I was getting these massive changes. And then I realized what was really missing was a true psychoeducational component. The parents have to be informed to know what to look for. And what I realized is when I started to see all this happening, I realized that both many clinicians, including psychologists and psychiatrists, were never informed about looking at people's faces or what to look at in a people's face. And I just smile when I think about this because I was in the medical school giving lectures, and I remember it was to the fourth year postgraduate residents. So they already have their MD and they're 4 years into residence. And the talk was why you should look at people's faces. And one resident said to me, "Why should I look at it?" He basically asked me, why should he? Because he was told by the senior attending psychiatrist not to look at people. This is what he told him. He said, take the clipboard. I have one right here.
Yeah.
Take the clipboard, hold it up, turn sideways, tilt your head backwards, and roll your eyes upward. And then the client, the patient, will think you're thinking about the patient. I said, I said to him, okay, you talk to me. And I went and did that. And of course, he couldn't get a word out because his body went into that defensive mode. He couldn't speak. And since that moment, became a very good friend. He sends me emails, he sends me books. It was still remembers the lecture. But the point is that our bodies tell us so much, our responses.
Mhm.
And we know that we want reciprocity. So when I engage you, I want something back.
Right.
And when it doesn't come back, my body starts feeling betrayed. And
Mhm.
this is what we see even with texting. So when people text, if
Mhm.
the latency is too long, how do you feel?
Right.
Yeah,
Like ignoring me.
right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, and most people have kind of like a window of 20 minutes they can handle, and then the narrative takes over, and then everything goes with it. But the point is, we're wired to be reciprocal, to be co-regulators.
Mhm.
So the texting is really an expression of an invite to someone else to help to signal them to co-regulate with you, and they
Mhm.
violate it. That violation of a engagement I call biological rudeness. So because our biology just never evolved to have that uh, disrupted. Our biology wants it to be reciprocal. And this is really the problems that many children have in school when they have behavioral issues, whether they're hyperactive or on spectrum. They are biologically rude to other kids and to teachers, and they are really literally punished for that rudeness, even though it's not a volitional rudeness.
Yeah.
It's a state-regulated issue, and this is why SSP is very successful with kids, because it shifts their physiological state, and now they become spontaneously engaging. And then what you learn when you see that is you learn that spontaneous engagement is not a learned behavior. It's the emergent behavior of a physiological state. So this means that our strategies of rewards and punishment for behaviors like that is just very inefficient. And we know it's inefficient. It
Right.
doesn't work. So when you have your own children and you try these things, you know it doesn't work.
Yeah.
And the thing that works is really engagement and support and trust.
Mm-hmm. So, mm, um, do you feel that a parent should just be ready for the engagement that their child is going to become? So, with one of my clients that's used the SSP, it was a stutter, and the stuttering decreased so much.
Yeah.
The parent didn't really understand why, and as soon as he got off the SSP and started like the total focus program or
Yeah.
whatever program he went into, the stuttering came back.
Yeah.
And it was, the parent really didn't know, do I just keep doing the SSP? How do I get him to stay in that state?
Well, okay, so, and this is my perspective, is SSP can be used repeatedly.
Okay.
I've initially, when I developed it as a research protocol, and as a research protocol, I couldn't give it repeatedly.
Mhm.
But I had a friend's son who used to come up every 6 months. He lived many miles away. They would come up twice a year, and we would see these incremental bumps. But the therapists out there using SSP, 4 to 6 week intervals, and they're seeing gains at each one. Now, the notion of the SSP is really that it's a neural exercise. It challenges the system. It's like a treadmill for the neural feedback of the regulation of the middle ear structures,
Okay.
so that it basically enables people to be more comfortable with the state of engagement and calmness. And so repeated ones are fine. I'm actually working on another intervention which has a code name. The code name is SSP Lite, and which is, if you have you listened to it yourself?
No, I've not.
Okay. When you listen to it, human voice starts to get muffled. And this is part of the trigger for people with trauma histories. The person is now leaving them. So the psychological feeling when the frequencies around the human voice get muffled, people feel there's a loss. But when the voice comes back, there's a feeling of exuberance. So it's like the intonations are actually pulling you in and pulling you out. It's really very powerful. But it's also, for people who are vulnerable, that powerful intervention can be too much. So I protect it in the light version. I protect the frequencies of human voice and move everything else around. And it tends to have more of a relaxing mode, but it may not have the same profound neural exercise outcome that you get with SSP. So I'm going to be using it more as an acoustic vagal nerve stimulator, which is a more state mod, as opposed to trying to train. SSP functionally is a training system
Mm-hmm.
for those structures, because over the days and the sessions, it becomes, the frequency bands change, they become broader. They start bringing a person more into the reality of all the frequencies of human voice, and it starts off very narrow.
So, can we talk about those frequencies, the difference between a low frequency and a high frequency,
Yeah,
and what they do?
sure. We have to go back and think about who we are as mammals.
Okay.
And mammals evolved from extinct ancient reptiles. And when that transition occurred, several things occurred. One was this neuromammalian vagus, which was now myelinated, meaning that it works more efficiently, but that the area of the brainstem that regulates that vagus moved from where the old vagus was regulated to an area that regulated all the muscles of the face and head.
Hmm.
So in a sense, we were able to project our bodily state in our voice and on our face. But everyone knows that, so that's a given.
Yeah.
But that had to do with cueing conspecifics, those of our own species, were we safe enough to come close to? And by the way, prosody tells people whether they're safe enough to come close to another person anyway. It's psychological distance, but we interpret it that way. So along with this shift in this vagal regulation also was a change in the middle ear bones. The middle ear bones broke off the jawbone. And that now enabled higher frequencies to be heard, airborne sounds, and not merely bone conduction. So it enabled mammals to hear sounds in a frequency band that reptiles couldn't hear. So they could communicate without being in, is basically like talking in code. But those vocalizations were cueing and enabled cooperation among these mammals to survive in a very hostile environment. And with this change in the ability to extract those frequencies came the ability to produce those frequencies, or prosody in vocalizations.
Okay.
Okay, so the frequencies that are in these airborne frequencies of social communication are unique to every mammal, or at least the size of the mammals, based upon the physics of the middle ear bones, the middle ear structures. So the sounds that we use for social communication are not the same as those of a mouse
Okay.
or a whale,
Yeah.
but they're all predictable based upon the physics of the middle ear structures. And
Okay.
so safe and sound protocol starts with an understanding of those frequencies, especially the frequencies that can get into your uh, through your ear, even when the middle ear muscles don't work. And there's a term called resonance frequency of the middle ear structures. And that's what it's focused at. And then the exercise goes around it, expanding and then contracting the band. But your real question, now back to your question, we got that background. The
Okay.
question is, those are unique frequencies that have the cues of safety and trust. High frequencies without prosody are danger signals, and all mammals know that. A high-pitched squeal tells you to orient towards. You often become helpful. If you step on the foot of a person or a dog or a cat, they'll squeal, and you will look down to try to be helpful. Now, if the vocalization is a low-pitched roar and you step on something, you're not going to look down. You're going to get out of there.
You can run.
You're going to run without even thinking about it. Low frequency sounds are predator sounds that are wired into our system, whether they're elephants or lions roaring or earthquakes. Low frequency sounds are predator sounds. High frequency sounds are danger. So we may want to either help or get away, but with low frequency sounds, it's unambiguous. So safe and sound protocol gets rid of both those ends and works with the stuff in between.
Okay. That's amazing. So again, I have questions about children with autism specifically. It seems to me that I have found children with autism really like sounds more than they like the sound of the human voice. Does this have something to do with that? And will Safe and Sound kind of address those?
Well, Safe and Sound was designed initially for uh, autism spectrum children. That's what
Mhm.
was designed for. But when you say sounds, when you talk about autistic kids, they often are making sounds. That's part of what you're talking about as well.
Yes,
And,
or they like to mimic the sounds they hear in their environment, the door closing, something, you
yeah,
know.
but I want you to think of that just as you would think of rocking for an autistic kid.
Okay.
These are state regulators. So if the child is now vocalizing, moving the lips and the oral cavity, those are actually ways of stimulating the sensory afferents of that whole social engagement system. So is ingestion. And so now we move over to people with eating disorders. Ingestion is their attempt to regulate their state. With autistic kids, it's going to be rocking or movement, stereotypic movements, and also vocalizations,
Mhm.
because the production of it is not solely production, it's also affecting the sensory components. So they are actually using the sounds to calm.
to calm their own body and their own
Yeah,
state.
yeah. But I want you to think of most autistic individuals as being in the physiological state that is really a state of defense. And you see the manifestation in terms of medical comorbidities, a lot of stomach issues, a lot of other autonomic features that are really functionally that this newer mammalian vagal system isn't really doing its job. It's not coordinating the rest of the autonomic nervous system because the rest of the autonomic nervous system is there in defense.
It seems to me from things that are coming out these days that anxiety is related to stomach issues, which is related to children being more emotional.
Yeah, but you don't need any of those words. All you
Okay.
have to say is that the autonomic nervous system is in a state of defense, and now you have the underlying structures or mechanisms for everything you mentioned.
And the what I'm kind of hearing you say is that the SSP does address all of those issues because of the
Because it goes directly at the underlying mechanisms, which happens to be physiological state. And so all these terms, even if we talk about gut, whether it's irritable bowel or constipation,
right.
we're really saying that the autonomic regulation of the gut isn't the way it should be, meaning it's not in the state of homeostasis. So when we become constipated, that's part of a system for mobilization. When we have to run away, we can't defecate. And then triggering diarrhea is part of a shutting down response that reptiles had when they went underwater. So if you had to go underwater, you had to reduce your metabolic demand. And what better way of reducing it is to get the food out of your system, because digestion is metabolically costly. So just get rid of it. So if we think about all these clinical disorders or comorbidities, they all have a function if the nervous system is attempting to, in a sense, protect in a defensive way.
Yeah. Wow. There's a lot of things that the SSP can really kind of regulate in a system to help a child not only be more social, but also feel better.
Well, that's, you see, feeling better and being social and even being smarter and being nicer, they're all the same. So if we don't have to be defensive, who are we? So what if we can allow, this is now the philosophical part of who I am.
Sure.
If we feel safe, we can be who we are. Now look at the autistic child. Is the autistic child ever really available, ever really there, really present? And the answer is not, maybe for slight moments, but in general not.
Right.
So because the system is, muscle tension, protection, all the things the child is telling you, is that the child's telling you that their nervous system is not safe. Now, what would happen if that nervous system felt safe? What comes out? It doesn't mean that all the features of autism will disappear, but many of them that we think are features of autism will go away.
Man, wonderful. Such good stuff. I mean, I want to use it on myself just for my own comfort and my own happiness.
Well, for all of us, we live in a world that says if we are calm and true to ourselves, available,
Mhm.
we won't do our jobs because we'll be lazy. It's kind of like we're given a myth as opposed to saying, wow, if you're who you are, now you can be your creative self and you can really do something important.
Wow. I hope I wouldn't be lazy. I hope I would have all this extra movement.
Right. You'd have a path, you have motivation. You can now go on that path because you have a passion and
Mhm.
you have a purpose in life. But we're structured in a way where people are really functionally by a societal norm accused of not wanting to do anything. Therefore, work is going to be good. It's going to be sanctifying. But historically, work, even if we go to the Judeo-Christian viewpoint, the word work is actually meant sanctification through work. If we go back to the biblical term for work in Hebrew is avodah, and that really means sanctification through work.
Oh, okay.
Now, that's different. That's different than assembly line, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. It's very
yeah, yeah. So in a sense, as we understand who we are as a species, there's been a lot of wisdom and insight about creating a lifestyle that is consistent with our biology. And that's really, that's where I see polyvagal theory taking us
Mhm.
back to our understanding of what our body needs and what our body's trying to lead us into.
Great, great. Is there a time that you recommend not to use the SSP?
Well, the only thing I'm concerned about, and we're trying really to inform the world of providers, is with people with severe trauma histories, not necessarily children. And I'm going to give you the difference. A child comes into a clinic with a parent or a significant person in their lives,
Right.
and goes into the clinic where there's another adult, and it's a safe clinic. And when the child becomes accessible, the child's protected and will be taken home by a responsible adult. If an adult comes in and they become accessible and vulnerable, who's taking care of them?
Hmm.
They have to leave the clinic, they have to get into a car, they have to do all these things, and now their system may be too porous or too vulnerable, and their body won't allow that. There are suggestions out there if you have a dog, a service dog or a pet, sometimes that's helpful to enable people to co-regulate when they're going through these things. So my concern is, especially with adults, you do a day and see how they are feeling. If they start getting sensitivity, then you work with a trauma therapist, a trauma-informed therapist, and you titrate SSP within that model. But you don't say, oh, you got to power yourself through this, go through it, and you'll be fine on the other end. Well, I've gotten very interesting emails from therapists. In fact, one was a psychiatrist. She
Mhm.
wrote me a 27-page single-space letter.
Holy moly.
Yeah, because she treated herself, which is again one of the rules you should never do, and she had a severe trauma history, and it triggered. She went through it and did it again. It triggered. She went through it 3 times with great perseverance, and then she was okay. And what she wrote back was she no longer needed to take the anti-anxiety drugs that she would take before she saw her first client in the morning, number
Oh, wow.
one. She noticed she now laughed at her daughter who was doing these antics. She had never seen them as being humorous before. And the third point, she said, she now understood why people liked music.
Oh, wow.
So her whole life experience had been really partitioned due
Mhm.
to having a nervous system that was in a state of chronic defense. Now, she was married, she had a daughter, she had a loving relationship, but her life was really a life of defense. And she knew it wasn't right, and she had heard me talk, and so was thrilled to get this, but she violated every good practice one that I've don't treat yourself, go to an informed therapist, let someone help you take the responsibility. So my major concern is for those with severe trauma histories, that it may act as a trigger their bodily state,
Mm.
because the SSP is effective. It does create bodily changes. And if you get those changes, what does your body do to that change?
Yeah.
And that needs part of a therapeutic interaction if the person's body recoils and becomes defensive.
Wow. It would be good for, I mean, just thinking about that for even foster children that
Oh,
have been through some kind of trauma, just to make sure that you have someone on hand that knows exactly what.
foster children, that's really an interesting issue, because with most individuals, they carry with them positive images of a relationship, someone who took care of them at one point in time. With some of the foster children, there is no memory trace. There's nothing to carry with them. So they're basically the elements, the moments of being safe with another is very, very narrow, very short. And those are the ones that have to be expanded. I'm working with a group in Australia called the Australian Childhood Foundation, and
Mhm.
that's what they work with. Basically, not children out of their biological families. And it's a very tough population to work with because they don't carry what other kids carry. They carry this image of what an ideal life could be like, these people, because they have a memory of their mother before something happened or something good. These children have nothing to lean on to.
Mhm. What about children with like an oppositional to defiant disorder or some kind of that have manic state
Yeah,
depression?
well, so as we use psychiatric terminology,
Mhm.
we can kind of deconstruct it to an autonomic state. So if a child is in oppositional,
Mhm.
that's going to be defensive. The physiology is being defensive. It's not being available, accessible, and spontaneously engaging. It's not a co-regulation. So what we can say is the autonomic nervous system and the social engagement behaviors
Mhm.
functioning in a way for co-regulation, inviting another into their psychological space and then giving something back. That reciprocity, then two people feel better through that interaction.
Yeah. Yeah. I I would hope that this might help those children because I think it's very hard for them to live in that state of defense.
Oh,
So yeah, that
so the world, again, we got to say, okay, that's one category, but think in terms of anxiety. Think of the world that we're in and think of the numbers of people whose anxiety is really difficult for them to manage on a day-to-day basis.
Mhm.
Then think about how they manage it through exercise, through addiction, addictive behaviors or addiction.
Mhm.
And so they're not creating the type of social interaction which our nervous system is functionally craving for the regulation. So you have eating disorders, which is another strategy to regulate state, but not a very efficient one.
No. Mm-mm. No, all of those don't sound good. I mean, in terms of the addictive personality, all of those things, it's a terrible thing to have to go outside yourself to try to make yourself feel better for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So tell me, is there any other strategies that you might? So sometimes it's hard for me to even get the headphones on some children.
Yeah.
So the headphones, just because they do have all that vibrating, the top does vibrate for them. Do you have any strategies of how to keep?
So when we had the issue, okay, so when we developed the model, it was with really kids who were relatively severe on the autism spectrum,
Okay.
which meant they had a lot of tactile hypersensitivity and confinement issues. And I would say we ran a few hundred, and there were a few, I mean, a few less than 10, where my staff had to hold the headset out over the years. And then over time, the kids would accept it because the sounds to them actually is something they like listening to for many kids.
Yeah.
I also tried it with external speakers, and it is, I would say it's effective, but not nearly as effective.
Okay.
There's something about over the ears where there is much more sound pressure localized on the ear, and you can't filter it out. You can't be distracted from it. It's there.
Right. Yeah. Do you ever recommend like just getting used to the headphones by watching like some of the kids that watch their iPads or whatever, just get used to the headphones, just putting them on and then slowly moving them over to the SSP?
I think that would be fine.
Okay.
But we used to try to encourage people after SSP not to listen to iPods and things like that
Yeah.
because they would start blowing the system out,
Wow.
too much. But I was reminded by this because I have a 19-year-old granddaughter now, and we were trying to put the headset on her, um, and it wasn't that welcome.
No, some people just are not into headphones. They don't like that put pressure on their head.
Yeah, well, tactile hypersensitivity is big. There are, if you go to the ILS webpage and send them a note, they have, some people have now lots of experience with all different populations, and you could basically ask them. Or there's also a parents' Facebook forum that has over 3,000 families on it. And and you can engage. And there's a provider's Facebook forum as well.
Yeah.
So what I'm really enjoying is the organic nature of how the intervention is now being used and how people are interacting and sharing knowledge and literally adapting it for different clients and different client needs.
Yeah, I've loved the ILS for years. The SSP came out after I became an ILS for my, why I haven't used it myself, but I used the ILS for my own anxiety, and it worked very well. I did the total focus program, and it just really helped my overall system. Kind of, don't get me wrong, I still have anxiety in high intense situations, but I really do think that the ILS does so many wonderful.
Yeah. What's nice about it is that it allows movement or integrates movement with music. SSP doesn't do that, although you can move if you want to. It was really designed, it tells you a lot about who I am. I designed something to basically be a stealth intervention that would come underneath, as passive and stealth, and kind of snuck in there, and that's really what I want it to be. But we're talking about making new products that kind of integrate focus with SSP, so that becomes kind of interesting where it will go in a year or two.
Nice. That's wonderful. Because I know the focus program does have activities for the kids to do with or adults that you can do with it. So that'll be nice to have something that kind of goes along with it. Mm. Well, sir, I am very happy to have you here. We're going to be kind of wrapping it up. So is there anything you'd like to tell us? I know you're going to be offering us some chapters of your book.
Yeah, so I provided 2 chapters. One is the first chapter in the pocket guide for the polyvagal theory. It's really a chapter on the neurobiology of safety, which is the underlying theme of everything that I do related to polyvagal theory. And the second chapter is really a primer on polyvagal theory from an edited book on clinical applications of polyvagal theory of Deb Dana. So the latter one is really, it's the theory in Cliff Notes form, more or less, somewhat readable, but the chapter from the pocket guide is very readable. But remember, underlying our quest in life is to be safe. And actually, I have one thing to share. So my nephew's son is on Spectrum, and he went through SSP and was listening and came out and said to his father, "Time slowed up." And of course, what was the major clinical symptom the child had was anxiety. And what is the quote, when we're no longer anxious, what are we really saying? Time slows up. And so, it brings tears to your eyes, but it is really part of the goal. And then I play with other types of metaphors. So we talked about accessibility versus vulnerability. But I also talked about the word stillness, how we embrace stillness. So if you have anxiety, stillness is frightening because stillness brings you into more of a shutting down situation. But if you're in a state of calmness, stillness is that expansion of time. It's the window for creativity and for dreams.
That's wonderful. You know, I've never thought about that because I have, like I told you, I have anxiety, and it's very difficult for me to sit down, and it's almost a guilty feeling. Like I almost feel guilty when I'm sitting for a long period of time because it's very difficult to feel.
Yeah, well, this is the whole notion of, in a sense, being in one's body, being present, and these again are concepts that are really getting a lot of press. You know, the embodied experience. We're really bringing the body into our psychological experiences. And it rightfully should be there because what you're describing is your body as a generator of energy or activity. And that generator can be disruptive in terms of what you want to do. But your body is telling your nervous system, take care of me. I need to move.
Yeah.
And now we have to get down to what are the cues that trigger the bodies need to move. And they tend to be cues of threat or defense coming from somewhere, whether it's a mental image that you haven't done what you need to do today, or you have something else is happening. But the metaphors are always going to be the same. They're going to be a threat to the system and trigger a defense, whether the defense is a mental image or not, a mental image or a physical reality, the body is going to react.
Yeah. Makes me think about my own self and all the things that, I need to I've never thought of it that way. So it's really nice to.
Well, let's do a quick therapeutic bit. You don't need to do anything. You see, once you phrase it that way, you already have contained yourself and create a expectation, which creates the anxiety. And so the issue is this: just throw it away
Yeah.
and experience it,
Yeah.
and then the you becomes available for everyone.
Yes. Slow it down. I mean, for a moment. Exactly. I need
Not too long. Not too long. No, I understand. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you again, sir. It was great to have you here and to, give us all your knowledge, because I'm sure we could listen to you all day. There's so much up there.
Well, thank you very much. Nice meeting you, Kolby.
Nice to meet you as well, sir. Have a great afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.